Well, today is July 20th, 2008, and we are at the home of Ben Smith, Jr. in Waycross, Georgia. And we're going to be asking him a lot of questions about his art career and his role as an artist in South Georgia. So we'll start by asking him, where and when were you born?
February 27, 1923, in Lakeland, Georgia. A small town about 40 miles west of Waycross.
And what were your parents' names?
My father was also named Ben Smith. My mother was named Maud Ruth Cooper Smith.
And were they both from Lakeland then?
No. My father was from Lakeland or in that area. My mother was a North Georgia girl from Jackson County, Georgia, which is up near Winder in that area.
Do you know how they met then?
Yes, she was accepted a job as a school teacher in Homerville, Georgia. My father was practicing law over there. And she had this sweet mate who had attended school, said, "I have this good-looking uncle I want you to meet." And they met, and the rest is history. They got married in Valdosta, Georgia.
Valdosta. So your father was also an attorney?
Yes, he was.
And
had there were three brothers in that family who were attorneys, and the black sheep was a sheriff.
And, so how did you get from Lakeland to Waycross then?
All right. My father took a job during the Florida boom in Miami, checking titles on some of that boom property out at Boca Raton and areas like that. But then the Florida hurricane of 1927 came along, and we left out there just before that hurricane struck, and we never went back. We came to Waycross because he already had some relatives here. So we came here.
So what year was that? Do you remember?
My opinion, it would be about the year we came was 1927.
To Waycross.
I was about 4 years old.
I see. So you hardly remember Lakeland then?
Yeah, I go there all the time.
No, I mean, growing up.
But it hasn't changed. In fact, it was called Milltown when I was born there, but Governor E.D. Rivers changed the name of it to make it a more glamorous sound. He named it Lakeland, and he was a native of there.
There's a big lake there, too.
Yeah, Banks Lake.
That's right.
That's why they call it Lakeland.
Yeah, I saw that on the map. Well, how many brothers and sisters do you have in your
I had a brother named Cooper Smith. I had a sister named Virginia.
Were you the oldest?
I was the oldest child.
And did your brother also become an attorney?
He's deceased.
He's deceased.
My sister's alive. She married a doctor. She lives out in Houma, Louisiana. She was a very beautiful girl. She won whatever beauty contest she was ever entered in.
I see.
She was on the Gator Bowl, too. She was a nurse. That's how she met her doctor husband.
Right. And your brother, was he a lawyer as well?
He was an organist. He really had no professional career, but he played the organ at church and had various pickup jobs like that. He was not dedicated to work.
Well, a lot of people aren't. In those early years, you're growing up here in Waycross. What did you do? What were your main
Okay, let me
interests?
say this. I grew up in the Great Depression.
Right.
I was a member of the Greatest Generation. And there were very few automobiles. We all worked. I had a job. I made $5 a week. Delivered packages at a drugstore. All the kids worked. And in that day and time. And it was a very simple life. still had a lot of horse-drawn vehicles and all ice wagons and milk wagons, all were drawn by horses. And I guess you would say that we were underprivileged children, but we didn't know that we were underprivileged, and that was a good thing, I guess. Life was much simpler than it is today. And we made our own toys, we made do with what we had, and we were happy kids.
Well, who were the
There also were survivors, I'll say that.
Well, did the Depression affect your family financially, or you didn't really?
We were better off than most people because my father had a pretty good income. He was a lawyer. Lots of people were out of work, though. Then, back then, they didn't have any unions, and the coastline shop was the biggest industry here. And at Christmas time, they'd lay everybody off and hire them back after Christmas. That sounds strange, but it's a fact.
Well, and in those growing up years, who were the most influential people in your life? I know you talked about your Uncle Will, who was a judge.
Yes, he was a judge, and he was kind of and early on, I found out that my grandfather had fought with Robert E. Lee, and he was always a role model for me. A very, very wonderful person, a spiritual person. And even today, he's my role model. My school teachers always were very influential with me. My mother was a school teacher all of her days. And so we came up in a very literate environment. We had good books in our house. We had books of poetry, and I was conversant with English and American poetry. Even as a young teenager, I was pretty well familiar with who were the great poets and what the great poetry was. Shakespeare, we had that.
In that regard, it doesn't seem like your family was really typical then, because you did have access to more culture.
I think we were an exceptional family. We weren't snooty people or anything like that. We didn't think we were better than anybody else, but we were way ahead of the general run of people in literacy and culture and those kind of things. We were also very spiritually oriented. We were in church every Sunday, and at all of the various meetings they had, we would be there. And that gave me a very good understanding and knowledge of Holy Scripture. I use that a lot in my business. You know, I can make an argument to a jury and say, "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness as a mighty stream."
Well, did your parents have any expectations of you about what you would be when you grew up? Did you feel any pressure for that?
I was kind of always a fair-haired boy. I was an A student. And I got out of a lot of schoolwork by drawing calendars on the board and things like that. I began to draw and become an artist at an early age. They even have pictures of me 6 years old drawing on the front steps. And so that's how far back that goes.
Well, did you grow up in the same, did y'all move at all?
We moved around a lot.
You did, in Waycross? Or?
Yeah, we probably lived. I went to every school at Waycross before it was over.
Oh, wow.
Everybody moved around a lot. I don't know.
Oh, that's...
Only very few people owned their homes, too. That's what came in during the Roosevelt administration. People started buying homes, you know. Before that, most people rented their homes.
Oh, they did.
Even well-off people.
So you would just, your father would move you when he found a better deal, or?
Got a better deal. One time I moved out to a little farm. And that lasted about 2 years.
Well, so your mother she continued to be a school teacher,
Yes.
all during this time.
She was a principal of a school when she died.
Well, how about the character of Waycross when you were growing up? Were there people involved in the arts at all?
Very little. I grew up in a segregated society. I'm glad that's gone, because I think it held us back. But what was the question?
Well, speaking of segregation, was it?
It was
like really oppressive?
we were taught to respect that race and to always treat them like human beings, and that was a part of our upbringing. We could get paddled if we used the wrong name or something like that. My mother didn't permit that at all.
Did you have any hired help in your family?
Oh yes, always.
Yeah.
We always had a maid and a washwoman.
Right.
By the way, I've got a picture of a washwoman I want to give you before you go. I did it with a big old load of clothes on her head like they used to.
Wow.
Pen drawing.
Well, how was the relationship between the people that you hired to work for
We
your
always had a
family?
very close relationship. They still come by to see us sometime. If they're in town, most of them moved up north, but they still drop in to see us when they.
Well, did your family encourage you when you showed
Always.
this ability?
We were always encouraged.
Very encouraged.
I was always starring in some kind of event or something.
So you were the oldest, so
Yes.
you were the first, and I guess the favored child.
I would say that any of us were favored, but I guess I had the most promise when I was growing up. I mean, overtly. The other children were talented too, but in different ways. My brother was a talented musician, pianist, and organist.
And well, so you showed this early ability for drawing, and how did your mother encourage that?
It seemed that was the first thing that I ever really cared about. I don't know why, I can't explain. There's nobody in my family on either side that was proficient in art or even had any interest in it. And why this should happen to me, I have no idea.
So you started from a young age just drawing and doodling. Was there any art class?
Yes, I started taking art when I was a teenager. She was I wouldn't say she was an exceptionally good art teacher, but she was all we had. And I've got the first pictures that I ever painted out there in my studio. It's a little watercolor. And I was a pack rat. I always say things that I did.
Well, how about at home? Were you expected to do certain chores?
Oh yes, we had to wash the dishes. My brother washed the dishes, and I dried them. We had things we had to do. We had to rake the yards. People raked yards back then. They didn't have grass.
You mean
It was
rake
considered a sign of sloth if you had grass in your yard.
But then you were renting these houses anyway, so you
right.
still would take care of the outside. Okay, well, let's talk about where you say you went to a lot of different schools because you moved around, but you went to grammar school in Waycross and
Yes, all of my schooling through high school was at Waycross.
And what did you go? Well, there's only one high school, I guess, back
One
then?
senior high school and a junior high too,
Okay,
which is in a different building.
I see. And do you remember the name of the high school that you went to?
Waycross High.
This Waycross. It's still there?
Oh,
It's not there.
now we have a county consolidated high school called Ware County. My son is a school teacher there. He's head of the English department. He's one of the rebel heirs, by the way.
So you were a good student because your mother was going to make sure you were a good student, right? Or,
Yes. She was the kind of person, too, she wouldn't let you make an error. I'd say something like between you and I, and she said, between you and me, object of a preposition. I mean, that was constant. part of our life, being corrected with our English. And she also would, if you sassed my mother, you would get something like this, how sharper than a serpent's tooth are the words of ungrateful child.
Well,
And you can't come back from that.
There's no defense for that. You just. So, were you under any pressure then at an early age to decide on your career, or you just?
It was always assumed that I would be an artist when I grew up. I never had any idea of being a lawyer. I'll tell you how that happened later on when we get to it.
All right. So you say in your family, your extended family, you know of no other artists. You just popped up.
No, I surely don't.
Okay, so what happened after high school?
I went to the Ringling Art School in Sarasota, Florida. A girl from Waycross and I went down there. It was a very good art school, by the way, and it was a 2-year curriculum. And I only went 1 year because the war broke out while I was down there.
So that would have been in 1941.
Right.
You had done 1 year
Right.
at the Ringling School. So at that point, when the war breaks out, everybody went to war. Everybody went to war.
Including all those other students down there.
Well, how about just before the war? Was there any kind of anticipation that the United States would be going to war, or was it just a surprise?
We never gave that a thought. I was, as I've told you, I was a very literate person. I read the newspapers and kept up the news even at a very early age, so I knew all about Roosevelt and Churchill and Hitler and Mussolini and those things. I knew about those people, and I had some concern, but I didn't think that they would dare to go to war with the United States. But they did.
So when Pearl Harbor came, it was just a really big shock.
Yes, I'll tell you where I was at Pearl Harbor. We were sitting at the dinner table. I was home on Christmas. I was home, and we were sitting at the dinner table, and we had one of those little Gothic cabinet of radios, and it was playing, and they said the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. This is no drill. This is the real thing. The Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. I didn't think that had any relevance to me at the time, but by the next May I was going off to war.
So by next May you had gone off to war, and in your book Chick's Crew you describe how you decided to join the Air Force. Can you describe that?
The Air Force was sort of the glamour end of things, and I had never been up in an airplane. I don't know why. I thought that was a good idea for me. Before it was over with, I did a lot of flying, but I thought it would be better than marching around in the mud.
Was there an idea that if you volunteered before you were drafted, that
Then you got a chance to pick your service, you see. If you were drafted, you went where they said you go.
Which would probably be the infantry or something like that.
Actually, we had a lot heavier casualties than the infantry did. The 8th Air Force had the heaviest casualties of any organization in the American Armed Forces, even more so than all of the Marine Corps casualties.
Well, you say that you have already done an oral history for is it the museum up in Savannah?
Yes.
They
have one.
Okay, and they go into
I did one for a local group too.
Wow. Did they go into a lot of detail then about your experiences during the war?
Seems to me that they did, but
Well, I was going to kind of go over or gloss over that, but if you want to talk about that in any detail, we can
Yeah, I'd
certainly
like to
do
talk
that.
about it.
Sure,
That's
go
very
ahead.
much a part of my life. It's
Well,
a high point of my life, as a matter of fact. I didn't have anything else to compare to that experience.
Well, in your book, you mentioned that you were going to try and, I guess, what would be the right way to put this, to prove to yourself that you were,
That I could stand. I always thought of myself as sort of a wimp when it came to physical contact and all. I didn't like football or being hurt, and it kind of left me with a complex. So I volunteered for combat because I said I need to get over this, or I'll be running from something for the rest of my life. And so I volunteered for combat, and that's what was so great about the war. I found out I could stand up to anything. That was a great revelation for me, to know that I could do that and do my job and do it well.
so,
It's the difference between a man and something else.
well, you really picked a really good test to test your mettle.
Boy, did I ever. Most of those crews didn't finish over there. They went over there. Most of those boys were killed. They were just young boys, and they were a great bunch of guys. Most of them were above the average in intelligence and all, and it was all volunteer. Nobody was required to fly against their will. And if you go to the flight surgeon and tell them you couldn't fly anymore, that was it. You would be grounded. But that hardly ever happened.
Yeah, how do you explain that? Because if that's your ticket...
It was more of a peer pressure, I think, than anything. Your buddies and all, we all depended on each other, and we were about to give up on our buddies, like that.
Well, do you think it, I don't know, affected how you made friendships? Because you might...
Those friendships, we kept them right on after the war, too. We had reunions, and there are only 2 of my crew left now. We all survived the war, all 10 of us, but now there are only myself and 1 other boy. The pilot died last March. Chip.
You told me that. Well, were you doing any kind of sketching at all while you were...
Oh, yes. These sketches...
Yeah.
Some of these sketches in the book here were done.
Yeah.
The ink drawings. Some of them were drawn over there.
So you were able to bring those back with you?
I didn't do all of them over there, but yeah, I remembered enough about it that I could reconstruct it. Some of them I actually did over there. I think I did this one over there.
We'll show that. We'll get a close-up of that
I was a
one.
pretty good artist even then.
Yeah, and how did your comrades treat you? Because they could see you could draw.
I think they looked on me with amazement, really.
Did they?
I also had a little camera I paid $1 for it. It's called a Baby Brownie, and I wasn't supposed to take picture submissions, but I did. And I would bring those back and get them enlarged, so I have a very complete photographic history of those times. I mean, I think it'll probably be in the museum someday, but I haven't seen anyone to compare with it.
Wow. Well, those pictures are very valuable, even though you're right.
These are all part of that. These photographs were every one of them were taken out of my
your collection? Wow.
They were taken out of my scrapbook.
I'll scan all those in and we'll make it a part of this
It's
record.
the King and Queen of England that came there. I was in this airplane here. This is a flak shell hit it and did not explode. It went on through and exploded at a higher altitude. So we shouldn't be having this conversation, really.
Well, how do you feel about surviving that?
Well, let me tell you what I did. I got better since then. When I came back to the States after that first tour, I was very bored, and I signed up for another tour of combat, if you can believe that. And I was going back overseas when the war ended. So I didn't have to go back, but I had signed up to go back, and I was right back up on B-17. But it turned out to be a good thing because I met my wife on that second tour.
Oh, well, let's talk about that. How did you meet your wife?
She came out, she was to a dance at Avon Park, Florida. She lived close by a little town called Fort Meade. And she was the hottest thing on the floor. She was really stacked, and all the boys wanted to dance with her. And so I grabbed her, introduced myself, and she told me she had a sister that lived in Waycross where I live, and I kind of figured right there anybody could dance that good would also be a good wife. I don't know that.
So that was the side.
That was the first introduction, and I'm still with her. And well, I went with her all the time I was at college, and we got married right after I got out of college.
Well, so the war was over, you didn't go back to serve your second tour. So what happens then? Did you get married?
I went to college after the war on the GI Bill of Rights. Most of the guys did.
Right, and so did you go to University of Georgia? Or?
I went to a place called Cumberland University in Lebanon, Tennessee, just east of Nashville. And I did all my college work there.
And what were you going for pre-law then, or?
I did all of it in the same school. I got an LLB degree, and I passed the bar before I got out of school. I was unique in that respect. I passed the bar in December and I graduated in May. Of course, I lorded it over all the other boys. By the way, all those boys were veterans in college when I was there. Bird colonels, lieutenant commanders, captains, and all. There was nobody that hadn't been in the war.
Well, so all of these people, how did you pick Cumberland University then? That seems an odd
I had a friend who was a lawyer. He was a friend of my daddy's, and he was telling me about this school up in Tennessee. And I don't know, it sounded like a good place to go. All the other schools, I didn't want to go to school in Georgia anyway. I don't know why I picked that school, but I did, and I'm glad I did. It was a great school. Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State, went there for one person. And then Senator Chavez of New Mexico. They had it was kind of a political clearinghouse. I mean, a lot of those guys went into politics after they got out of school, including me.
So all of you're all going to school in the GI Bill, and I know at the university.
That's a great piece of legislation, too.
It's been touted as one.
It almost didn't pass. It passed by one vote, by the way. We had a Democratic representative from this 8th district here, John S. Gibbs. They flew him up to Washington to cast the deciding vote.
Nice. One vote. I did not know that. So all of these fellows, your fellow students, they've all been in the service.
All very mature.
And really dedicated.
And they were serious too. They weren't up there to party. They were there to get an education. That was quite a difference in what some of the other schools were.
They were anxious to get out and
make up for those years they had lost. Most of us have been in service 3 to 4 years. I was in 3.5 years.
What was the kind of mood of the country like at that time? Do you think there was a sense of optimism for the future?
Well, of course, the United States at that time had embarked on a lot of new adventures. Farming was revolutionized during this time. This is when tenant farming and all that was phased out. People started buying their own land, and of course, all of the banking laws were changed, and everything. It was I think everybody was full of hope at that time, and especially with the fact that we had saved the world. Civilization was a pretty heady feeling too. Most people shared in that feeling.
So did your wife, and for the record, what's your wife's
She's always
name?
called Lynn, Lynn.
And you say you waited until after you finished college, you got married.
Yes, and she had moved up here, gone to work with the telephone company by then, and lived with her sister and aunt there. They were already here at Waycross. They were old Waycross folks. And she came on up here, and we got married.
Were you dating at that time? I mean, while you were in college?
We dated a long time. We dated while I was in school. I would come home on the weekend to see her and thumb from Tennessee back to Tennessee just to see that girl. That was a pretty big deal at that time.
Really? So you hitchhiked. That's how you got back and forth.
Yeah.
Was it hard at that time?
No, I was an expert hitchhiker. I knew exactly how to do all the little body language. And I hardly ever missed one. And then I would go sometimes to the farmer's market there in Atlanta and catch one of those all-night freighters, and they would drop me off at Waycross. I knew all the ropes about getting around. Never cost me a dime. Sometimes the guy would pick me up and stop and get a little. I said, come on, let's get a bite to eat. I said, that's all right. I'd sit in the car and say, come on, son, I'll buy you lunch. And he staked me to a meal. I was an expert sponger.
So you graduate, and what year did you graduate with your degree?
I don't remember. It's 48, I think.
1948. And you come back to Waycross.
Came back to Waycross, and I first started practicing law with my dad. He had an office in downtown, and he had osteomyelitis, and he was very ill at the time, so it was heaven sent for me. I just took over the practice, and it began to grow almost from the start. Of course, all the young veterans were being elected to office, and I ran for justice of peace. I was elected against an old line politician, and I was in politics most of my life. I was never defeated for public office.
I read in an article that your first case was a murder trial. And you tried it before.
I tried it before my judge, my uncle, Judge Will Smith. I remember it distinct because rather than call me counsel or what, he called me Ben Jr. He said, Ben Jr., don't argue with the witness. It was kind of humiliating to me. The guy was sitting in the electric chair, and he actually was executed, but I was out of the case by then. Some bleeding hearts had hired some lawyers from Augusta on the appeal, and
so you were the defense.
He didn't get anything he didn't deserve, though. That was the meanest little fellow I have ever seen.
Well, can you talk about the crime he did, or no?
Yes, it was a terrible crime. He was broke down with his wife, a kid down. We're almost on the end of the Okefenokee Swamp in Florida, and the guy stopped to render assistance to him. And he marched that fellow off in the woods at gunpoint, shot him in the back of the head, and took his rig and left out. They didn't know who did it for several years, and then his wife eventually left him, and then she told the authorities about this thing in Florida. So my uncle was sheriff over in Clinch County, and he went up to South Carolina where he was serving a prison term and extradited him back to Georgia, and that's when they tried that case. I was an appointed counsel.
by the court. He was appointed.
Back then, they would appoint you on a murder case right out of law school. I mean, they didn't have anything as like adequate counsel and all. They didn't care whether you were adequate or not. That was the thing that grew up in the law later on.
Okay. Well, how did you get to be the judge?
I ran for the job. The judge was a very old guy. The court, that particular court, had gone down into, I mean, it wasn't serving its purpose at all. They weren't handling the caseload they should have been handling on. And I didn't have it. It was a three-way race, and I won out. And I turned that court into a pretty good court where we were handling a lot of civil business and criminal business. All the misdemeanor cases were tried in that court. It was first called the City Court of Waycross, then later on it was called the State Court of Ware County. But it was the same jurisdiction.
Would this be like a magistrate judge or?
No. We had jury trials and all. It was just like a common law court. I was a magistrate when I was Justice of Peace. I had that for 2 terms before I ran for judge.
So you kind of followed in your Uncle Will's
the law has been a tradition in our family. Yes, and there's still children in the family that are lawyers and all. In the legislature, we were always a political family too. We have a cousin in the legislature right now.
Did you have any law clerks then working for you when you were the judge?
My wife always, I guess it was to keep an eye on me, but she always.
She was your law clerk then?
And she was my law clerk, and she was a very good one too. She finally got to where she's a pretty good lawyer even. I mean, she learned a lot about the law, and she could do most of it. She never tried cases, of course. She didn't have a law degree, but she was a wonderful law clerk.
Did you reorganize it in any way, or how did you?
Well, I just spent more time on the thing, and the lawyers, of course, would file the cases in my court because they knew they would get tried, and they had somebody that was competent that would give them what they needed. The other guy, he hardly ever held court. I mean, it just got to nothing.
So you really improved the whole process.
Yes, I did.
You made a more
I made it a
fair.
useful court. It's still a useful court. Handles a lot of business. Then for a while I was a Superior Court judge, but that's the main circuit court in Georgia, the Superior Court. And I had that job by appointment. They had an overflow of cases in all the jurisdictions, and I was one of the appointed judges to handle overflow cases, so I was also a Superior Court judge.
So was your docket pretty full all the time then?
Yes, I always, that's what I like to have a full docket. I mean, that's what it ought to be.
So how did you decide to run though? How did you decide that you wanted to be a judge? I mean, you're already in your law practice.
As I told you, I had never even thought about being a lawyer, but my mother says, why don't you come back here? I mean, why don't you go to law school and come back here and take over your daddy's practice? He's sick and he can't handle it. And I didn't have anything to do when I got out of the war, the party. And so that's why I decided to do that. And it's always been a good decision. I'm glad that I did. The law has been a great life for me. And I took naturally to it, too. It was just in my blood.
So you were able to retain all of those cases that you have to study for the bar exam and
Yeah, I studied hard for the bar exam, but I went ahead and took it in December before I got out in May. And the idea was that I would be familiar with it, and then in May, when it really counted, I passed, but I surprised myself by passing it in December.
Was it all essay kind of thing? You write in like these blue?
A lot of it was essay.
All of it.
I was always a good writer. I don't know where I didn't study writing, but my mother and father both expressed themselves very well in writing, and I had a brother that was a fantastic writer.
That helps if you're a judge, that's for sure. You have to write those briefs or write your.
That's the first serious writing I ever did, was writing legal briefs, and I was very good at it. And from there, it wasn't much of a jump to writing a book.
Well, let's go back to talk about when you were in art school at the Ringling School. How was that set up?
Okay.
Was it like, an academic?
We had life classes down there, portrait classes. I first thought I was going to be an illustrator, you know. I didn't tend to get into fine arts at all. And I studied illustration for some of the really fine illustrators that were now teaching art. And after the war, I did pick art back up for a while. I could still draw and all, but your father, Bill Hendricks, was the one that got me started back in art. He started having an art class down at here in Waycross, and I signed up for that class, and the rest is history. I went right back to painting and drawing, and then when Bill gave up the class here, I moved over to Brunswick and started going over there to class on the weekends. Of course, that's when I met you. And I just had a ball with it. I was always glad to be around Bill. He was fun to be around. And a very cultured person, too. I don't know where he picked up all this culture, but because he said he was born in Arkansas. And I didn't know they had any culture in Arkansas. But he knew a lot about systems of art that most people didn't have any idea about. And he was always getting interested in some new phase of art, Oriental or whatever, Japanese or Chinese or whatever happened to be interesting to him at the time. He was just like a sponge. He lapped all of that stuff up, and he imparted some of that to me. We became very, very close. He would eat at my house whenever the art class was over,
Well, I want to talk about that in more detail in just a minute, but I wanted to get back and ask you, how do you think you drifted away then from the idea that you wanted to be an illustrator?
I never completely drifted away because I could always draw.
Yeah, but you were going to school.
But I was not.
You think maybe being in the war kind of changed?
No, I don't think so. It's just I just didn't pick it back up. There was no particular reason for that. I just didn't pick it back up for a while. But then when I did, I enjoyed it very much, and I've been with it, been involved in it ever since.
Well, was there ever a time you felt your legal career was maybe taking a back seat?
No, they never interfere with each other. And by the way, I was able to use my art. I didn't have to hire guys to do models and diagrams and all. I could do all that myself and save that money because it was very expensive. And I could make the little sand tables. The first, we made a sand table of a crossing accident one time with little trays and everything, and I did every bit of it.
Wow. Well, who coined the phrase "the hanging judge"?
I guess I think that came about because I hung pictures. I didn't hang anybody, but the fact that I hung pictures, I guess, was how that resulted.
So maybe an article in a paper or something?
I think there was a mention about the hanging judge in an article in a paper, I think so.
And also, mentioned in that really nice eulogy you wrote for Bill Hendricks, saying that you use prisoners as models sometimes. How did you do that now?
Well, I had the keys to the jail. I could get anybody out of jail that I had put in there, and there was always some kind of hobo or something that I had. And what I would do, I'd let him post the class, and then I'd release him. He'd go on his way. We had some of those guys were extremely exceptional models. I mean, shaggy-looking people, and
had a lot of character then.
Yeah, a lot of character.
Oh gosh, I think that's hilarious. So how would you do the paperwork on that? Would you say, well, time is...
I didn't have to do any paperwork. I just sent for him.
Okay.
And they bring him over there. We were not too far from the jail where we were doing about 2 or 3 blocks was all it was from the where we had this, where we did the artwork.
Well, I think that's a really unique way to get models, and I don't think I've ever heard of that.
I don't think anybody else ever did that either.
I think you're the one and only. I just want to say you can take a break anytime you want.
No, I'm enjoying it. Let's go ahead. Unless you do.
No, I'm fine. We still got another 10 minutes on this tape. So, well, let me ask you this. How do you think your art then has matured over the years? How do you think, is there anything you...
Well, I always had some urging from Bill. Bill would put ideas in my head that I would follow through with. Bill always said that the main thing is that you learn to draw. He said a lot of people want to skip drawing and go on to painting and all, and you could tell the ones that skip drawing. And he always was very emphatic that you do a lot of drawing. And of course, he was the best guy with a pencil I ever saw. I never saw anybody could touch him with a crayon or a pencil. And he insisted that we do a lot of that. And of course, we drew from life, and we did portrait. A lot of those pictures that I have now, that I did in class. That one of Charlotte out there did in class.
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll be able to walk around and we can talk about those a little bit later.
I started out with probably mostly with charcoal, and then I did some oils. I went to a couple of watercolor workshops, one in Cedar Keys, Florida, and then I made myself proficient in all media before it was over with. I did pastels. I did a lot of pastels because you could finish a picture in one class, you know. And my favorite medium was a tempera medium called casein. I don't think they even have casein anymore, but most of my pictures were done in casein. The reason for that is it dried real quick, and you didn't have to wait for something to dry, you know, to go on it. Most of my pictures about nature and water birds and all are done in casein. It's a tempera. It's made with the curds of milk. And of course, all the old masters were done in tempera. Those old Flemish masters painted in tempera. And
those are still around. All those, it's an organic.
Like the one over there, the substitute there. One of the Virgin there.
That's just amazing.
That's a picture that Bill and all of us saw in Florence, and I bought the Portnari altarpiece, it's called.
Well, let me ask you this. You can get a degree that certifies you to be a lawyer, but how do you know when you're an artist? How did you decide for yourself that you were an artist? Was there a point?
I have a feeling about that. Being an artist is a personal expression, and I don't think one person's art ought to ever be compared to another person's art, because this is this guy's statement about life, and it's entitled to consideration regardless of how good it is. And so I've seen some what I thought was very inept painting, but But still, what that guy had to say about life, and I think it was worthy of consideration. I think there came a time when I knew I was a pretty good artist. Bill was the one that encouraged me to get into this folklore art, local color stuff, juke joints and country funerals and bluegrass festivals and things like that. And I did a lot of those. And that was kind of where, if I have any fame, that's kind of where it came from, is those things I did with local color.
So was there a specific moment or did you just say, oh, I am an artist, or just...
I never had any doubt about that.
Because you started...
I could draw very well, even back during the war. Yeah.
Okay.
And I knew that I could draw. That's just a question that doesn't arise. I don't think anyone said, well, I am an artist. There was no occasion for that, but I felt good about my progress, and I was always trying new media, and when I'd master that, I'd go on to something else, but I never left off drawing.
Well, do you think then art then is a kind of a solitary work? It's your expression of what you're trying to say. Is it a solitary kind of an act? Or?
Yes, and of course there have been art movements and all, like the Impressionist movement and the Art Deco and all those. I think that most of the art being turned out now is kind of, to me, it's kind of sad that I don't think it is really certainly not on the national level is there any art being turned out that we ought to, like Andy Warhol and things like that. They leave me cold.
Well, what are some of the things you're doing right now? Are you still active in?
I haven't done a painting in a while. Still doing some drawing. My children have most of my paintings, and I don't know how they cabbaged onto them, but they did. They will tell me, you gave me this, and I don't know whether I did or not, so I'm not in a position to argue about that.
Well, so art is really, if there was a really key part of your life and still is, what you couldn't, how do you think your life would be without art?
Wouldn't be half a life. I mean, even just knowing about it is and your father's responsible for that. I don't know that I would ever pick back up without the influence of Bill. But I know I not only am a painter, but I know a lot about the art history and who were the good painters here. And I went to Italy and saw all of these things, and I have a good understanding of art from beginning to end. And who were the good painters and who were the lesser painters, and the Italian school and the Flemish school and the Impressionists and all. I know about all those.
Well,
and I've seen most of them.
Do you have a favorite kind of something that influences you the most? Then
Not really.
No?
For a while I loved the Impressionists and still do. And then the Post-Impressionists, I like the Flemish painters. When I went to Spain and I went to the Prado, that's where the Goyas and a lot of the great painters are. And Bill, your father liked the Flemish painters too, because they were master craftsmen. I mean, And believe it or not, there's some quite good American artists too. They're not living now, but they have a lot of those up at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington and the Hudson River School. Those were quite good artists. Whistler was a great artist, and John Singer Sargent. Yeah. A lot of good American artists. Frederick Remington.
Well, do you think that in your art and your paintings and drawings that you have are going to be your greatest kind of legacy?
What your father always liked is that one out there. I won the Blue Ribbon and the Golden Isles tournament. It's the part of town where the black people live, and it's called Oak Street. And he always thought that was my finest painting. I said, it's a pot boiler. He said, this ain't no pot boiler, he would say. He was very taken with that painting. It's casein, by the way.
We'll have to get that one on tape.
Now this is oil. It was done in the style of one of the French painters that came after the Impressionists. His name was de Stael, S-T-A-E-L. And he did these thick impasto paintings, and for a while I did some paintings in that style. And again, Bill encouraged me in this too. He encouraged me to follow different schools of painting and do paintings from those schools. One of them I did a skyline of Savannah in a style, sort of a murky style called Mauricio Trillo was the name of the artist, and I did some pictures in that style for a while. I was not ashamed to work in some artist's style, to try to, for instance, the picture right back of you, there's a little portrait there. That's El Greco. It's done in the style of El Greco. It's done with, did an underpainting of green earth and white, and then glazed the color and the values into it, just like the old Renaissance artists used to do.
So did you do a lot of experimenting then?
Yes.
You did?
Yes, and I learned a lot from the experimenting. Now that's my Velasquez right there. He did the little infantas that's my daughter when she was 6 years old, and some of your daddy's paintings on there, he helped me with that rabbit, as I recall, and the sleeve, but that was done in the style of Velasquez, where the lost profile, you know.
Well, there's one more thing I wanted to ask you before we move on to a different section, and I don't think we ever got the names of your children. And I'd like to get that for the record.
We've got Ben III, his oldest. William Lawrence, he's the second. John, he's in the Rebel Airs there. Bill and John are in the Rebel Airs. They're both musicians. My youngest child is a girl, Evelyn, and she makes her living with art. She's an artist, and a very good one. She's a staff artist for one of these places like Disney World and all like that. Theme.
I see.
She does their artwork for. She has a very good job. She just recently won a prize and went up to Buffalo, New York to be wined and dined.
So we're starting a new family tradition of artists. I was just going to ask if there were any artists coming up on her children.
Yes, I have a grandson right now that's a pretty darn good artist, and I think he wants to be a history teacher, but he'll use his art probably. And
okay, we're going to go on to the next part, which is talking about the Art Center on St. Simon's, as you recall it. And I was wondering, since you and Bill Hendricks were really close, if you remembered what he said about the first art center when it was by the airport. Did he ever talk about that?
That's the only one I know.
Oh, you know, the one that was, not the one that was not the one he built, but when he first came from Atlanta, he was in the they call it the bachelor officers' quarters, and it was by the airport.
I was not involved in that, so I don't.
Yeah. Did he ever talk about
I didn't
that?
know your father when he first came to the island. I knew him. I first met him was when he came to Waycross, and I followed him back over to.
Okay.
The Island Arts Center was pretty elaborate when I first started going. It had a couple of studios in there, and a kitchen, and a reception area, and bathrooms.
Well, let me ask you, was there like a traditional, a link, I guess, between Waycross and St. Simon?
No.
There's not?
No, they're not too close as far as I know. Oh, yes. Wait a minute.
Well, Waycross and St. Simon.
There was a Waycross colony over there in
Yeah.
St. Simon's where a number of people had built summer houses over there. In that respect, there was a connection. Some of them still have those houses.
I do? I didn't know that.
Yeah. I know one family that still has their house over there to go to my church.
So in other words, the people that lived in Waycross didn't go to St. Simon's regularly just to go to the beach.
They went over there during the summer months, and there was a lot of rivalry in sports between Glenn County and Ware County.
Oh. Yeah, I think, and that was in football, wasn't it? I
Yeah,
think
it was
that
in football.
continued on for a long time, and still probably does. You said that you took some art classes in Brunswick. Was that?
I did. I was life class with Bill.
In Brunswick?
And then when Bill gave it up, I took it over. I taught for about 10 years over there myself.
That's right. Well, how do you have any memories of some of the exhibits that they had?
Yes, I did. They were always having exhibits, and I had exhibits over there. And Bill and Mitty were very good about giving exhibits for their students and exposing them to the public. And then Bill had a lot of shows himself over there. And of course, I went to those. There were a lot of great people over there. Bill had worked himself into a situation where he was the person to be seen with over there. All that Sea Island bunch over there, they just took him under their wing, and he was the guy to be seen with. I mean, a lot of those people were very wealthy people who were his patrons.
That's right.
Bill did a lot of portraits of those people. They were kind of like, I called them, and he called them this. I believe this was his term, board of directors portraits. I mean, they were good likenesses, but I mean, he knew what they wanted.
Well, do you have any memories of the people that were involved?
Yes,
in
Charlotte, of course, is my Carolyn McMillan, the girl that there was just a lot of people. One of them was a very fine watercolorist.
Do you remember Rita Van Pelt?
Who?
Rita Van Pelt?
Yes, I remember her.
She was she working in publicity or something? Or was
Most of those students were female.
Yeah.
We had a few male, but most of them were female.
Well, why? Well, since you say that, why do you think they were? Mostly, do you think art was considered a female
I have no
pastime?
idea, but that's just the way it was. I mean,
I know that Charlotte.
most of our models were kids that went to Brunswick College and stuff like that. They were just trying to earn a few bucks, and we took them under our wing, and they were just part of the family, you know.
So you knew about the art center from Bill Hendricks. You had made contact with him, or you met him. I think you said you met him in the art supply store here in Waycross.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a college. And then,
And that-
Mrs. Nolan was from Brunswick. Julia Nolan, she was a part of that class, and then she took art over there in our class too, in St. Simon. She was Julia Sherman. She was an old banking family over there in Brunswick.
Well, did you know a Mary Wiley Jones from Waycross? Don't know her, okay.
I can't say that within it.
This goes way back. This might have been before you were associated with it.
Probably was. I don't recall that name.
Was that like in the late 50s, you recall, when you first started coming to the Art Center?
I think so.
Like the late 50s, okay.
Wouldn't want to be held to that, but that's kind of the way I recall it.
Well, the Art Center was built in 1956, so...
It was already built when I started going over there. There was no other thing.
So, and I read that you had several exhibits there yourself.
Yeah.
And how did they promote that?
Well, we served champagne for one thing.
Did they put notices in the paper? And that
Yeah, and that little island, well, like the one that you brought to Charlotte, it was something like that.
So that's how they.
You know, and they put back. I was on the cover of one of them, I recall, in front of an easel with a brush, and they saw that you got the publicity, all right. And they were always crowded with people. We had
so there was a lot of people at the openings.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a big art colony over there, brother. There are a lot of people that are involved in the arts.
I went to
Beth Angle.
right. It says in one of the articles that when you had your exhibit, you stayed with Dr. and Ms. Engel. So were they good friends or?
Good friends.
They were good friends. Mm-hmm. What about any of the other programs at the Art Center, like the scholarship programs? Did you know anything about those?
I didn't know anything about that. They might have had some, but tell you one thing we always did. We always had a meal. I would cook clam chowder or some kind of exotic thing. And your mother kind of took a down view of all that cooking that we did, but we did it anyway.
I wanted to read this quote to you here. It's from Quayle Walker, who was president of Dixie Paint and also president of the Art Center at one time, early in 1960. And he said that he thought the success of the arts in Glynn County was a result of a significant popular movement, a cultural explosion. And that was in 1960. Do you think there was a cultural explosion in 1960 that you were aware of?
I would say of sorts, yeah.
How do you count that?
I can't explain it. It's just that there's something nice to do, and like I said, Bill was the guy to be seen with, you know. You were a friend of Bill Hendricks, you were pretty important. I don't think he really tried to do that. He's just a lovable guy, and you know, people just took to him.
Well, let's talk about, it's really hard to talk about the Art Center without talking about Mitty Hendricks. So,
Mitty Hendricks was brains of the whole thing.
You think that you would give her that much credit?
One thing we used to Bill used to throw his stuff on the floor, and we'd pick it up and take it home. And some of those things I have framed right now that he threw them. But Mitty stopped that. She turned all his art into cash that she possibly could. And I think Bill didn't care about money. I mean, she did. But as a means to live. I don't mean in an ugly way, but Mitty was a good financier, and she turned his art into income.
Well, did you see her as being the organizer over there for these?
I admired her very much. She was great at organization. We'd still be in Italy if it hadn't been for Mitty.
Well, that might not have been such a bad thing.
She was a mover and shaker. She was always very stylish too. Your mother was a real dresser. I think she liked me as good as she liked anybody.
Well, what was do you remember when you first met her? Did you have any?
Pretty soon after I started going over there. I mean, you could, impossible not to meet her if you met Bill. She was always in the background there somewhere.
I wanted to ask you about Alfred Jones, who was...
I don't know anything about Alfred Jones except by hearsay. I never met him personally.
Well,
but I'm sure he had some involvement there.
I was going to ask if you knew how he was involved with these.
Probably financially, because he was an entrepreneur and had money.
There isn't.
The Fendigs were always very much involved with Bill. And
well, what do you think? I mean, you talk about Waycross, and there's still artists in Waycross.
Yes, we have some very good artists in Waycross now, but they all came after I did. We didn't have any before me.
And it's these are all really small communities that we're talking about. And St. Simon's was very small as well. How do you explain that there's any art school at all? I mean, it just seems a phenomenon
Most
to me.
Like my daughter went to school. She went to Atlanta Art School, and then she went to Italy and studied Fiesole above Florence. She was there for a year, and most of the local Waycross artists they had a very good art school over in Valdosta, west of here. And my son Ben went to that school. He's a pretty good artist, but and a lot of them went to the Atlanta Art School, and then we got the Savannah Art School, which opened up, and a lot of them. So there were no schools before that time, but then they proliferated since the time I got into the.
But in before or around 1960, I mean, here's this art center that's fairly good size, with a population of just several thousand on St. Simon's, and it just doesn't seem believable that it could be supported.
She was a very lovely person. She was I can't think of her first name right now. I'm having a senile seizure.
Amy Reed Penn, right?
Yeah.
I remember her.
Amy Reed Penn. She was always a fixture like that. She was always there. She was a great, she died of cancer. But we all loved her. She was a big girl. She was, I won't say she's an old maid, I'll say she was a bachelor maybe.
Well,
Amy Reed Penn, yeah.
Amy Reed Penn. I remember her. She was, I remember her just being a very, very nice person.
And there was a very good watercolorist over there. I don't know why I can't her husband was a naval officer. And she was an excellent watercolorist. That's all she did, though, was watercolor. I never saw her do any other kind of medium, but she was very good, and I may thank her for name before we're finished. She was always in the class, though.
We mentioned the Navy now. At that time, there was Glencoe, and there was Glencoe at that time. You know, the Navy base.
Yeah.
And was there a lot of Navy, I guess?
Not that I ever saw.
No.
No, we didn't get those people.
Okay. Let's see. And so all of these places in Valdosta, you mentioned Savannah, all of those happened after.
Right, after I got back into the movement.
And there wasn't anything before that.
But now they're full.
Well, do you think that an artist, if you were going to be an artist as a profession, do you think when you were growing up, would that be a profession that was valued?
No.
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 Not even for a man.
The first artist of this area to gain into prominence was named Lamar Dodd. He was the first one to gain into national prominence and all, and he taught at the University of Georgia. He taught at their art school. They had an art school, by the way. And he was a very good artist. A realist. He didn't do abstracts, but he did southern, like cotton pickers and things like that, things on the southern scene, but he was an exceptionally good artist.
I remember that name.
He was the first.
See, he was the first.
He was the first that I recall that even had any prominence as an artist in this area. The South was not big on fine arts back even a few years ago.
When was the peak of your participation at the Art Center? Do you remember about what year?
The 10 years that I was teaching the life class and the portrait class. Life and portrait, we sort of mixed that up together. And I've got a lot of pictures here that I did in that class.
How would you structure your class over there when you were teaching?
Casual. Remember what I used to? We always used to spend the mornings on the beach when I taught on the beach. You and your little sister and all. And sometimes Emily and I would walk to the King and Prince and back to East Beach. But it was always casual. I mean, nothing else would have made sense.
Well, when you were teaching your class, did you? I know, in a class of Dad, people would bring in stuff they were working on, and then you'd work on that. Is that the way you did your class when you were teaching?
No, it seems to me that most of the time we would finish the picture in one class. We didn't carry a picture over to the next class at all. We'd always have a different pose for each class, and most of the things I did in that class I did in one pose. I've got a lot of pictures right now. I learned to work fast and I never did belabor a picture or just work on it a long time. So.
Let's see.
I've always had a belief that anybody can learn how to draw if they apply themselves to it. Some people, I say, I can't draw a straight line. Well, I say, well, I can't either. But there's always one exception to that. So we had a Presbyterian preacher that came to the class, and he couldn't draw, and he never would have learned. He didn't come to draw it. He came to look at the naked models, I say.
This is a Presbyterian.
I'm not going to call his name.
No, don't call his name.
I guess I've identified him by calling him a Presbyterian.
No, that doesn't exactly narrow it down. In 1991, the Glen Art Association actually left the building, and I was wondering
That was sad to me.
if you have any.
I didn't have any.
Remember about that?
No, I just.
What you felt about that?
I had no knowledge of it. I wasn't involved in it, and I thought it was a mistake. Still do. That art center was this thing that St. Simon's had going for it. It hasn't been much of a center since then. I mean, I went to a couple of shows at the new place, and I was not impressed at all. But that was a great place where we had great studios and a great facility. We had everything we needed. We have receptions there, plenty of room.
What do you think there's like?
And your mother was prime. I think your mother was the prime mover in all of that. I don't think Bill would have ever got off the ground with Bill.
Well, did you get a sense of a philosophy then about what the art center was all about? Was it more for fine art or commercial art or a combination?
Fine arts, I would say. I don't remember. Of course, you could have gone into commercial art, but we never emphasized that at all. Never no classes in advertising art or anything like that. We didn't get into that at all.
So it was more traditional, I guess, or I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is. I think now artists are looking for more commercial applications of their work.
We didn't get involved in that. I don't say that some of them couldn't have gone on and made a living with commercial art. I think it's kind of a mistake. I think if I had, I think it's a waste of time to study commercial art. I think the good ones have always been fine artists too, you know. Like Montgomery Flagg and all those guys can paint anything.
If you paint with the idea or draw with the idea that it's just to sell it, do you think that would impact what you're doing?
Oh yes, of course. And then, of course, I didn't have to paint for a living. I think I could have made quite a good living with painting, but there's some uncertainty about that. And I always had a good income. I could afford my art, you know. And consequently, I gave a lot of pictures away that I could have sold. And I'm not sorry about that.
Well, looking back, thinking about all of these events that happened in the 60s and the Art Center and all the activities, that's a very different atmosphere than today. And
Yes.
And I don't know if you've been to St. Simon's recently, but it's very developed over there now, and there's a huge population, but there's no art center like that. Do you think?
No, I think it's deteriorated. I think those are days gone by and the days of the past, and I don't think it's going to come back either. Which to me is sad. I'm glad that I had my time, but when a community doesn't embrace the arts and all, it's not much of a community to me. My boys play over there a lot.
Well, speaking of that, I think I forgot to ask you about your connection with the Rebel Heirs, which are your son.
Well, I got sort of interested in Confederate history because I had a grandfather that fought with Robert E. Lee, and it was kind of a big movement for a while around here. And
do you remember about what year that would be, approximately?
No.
20 years ago? Or?
But these boys were already musicians, and I talked them into forming a little organization or band that played heritage music and all, and they became quite famous, and they played all over the South. As far as Austin, Texas, we went out there one time and played for the Sons of Confederate Veterans Convention out there. And nothing racist about it at all. In fact, one of the people that came and stayed in my home was a black man who taught school down in Florida, down around Kissimmee, and his grandfather had been a Confederate veteran and had fought with General Forrest, and there was nothing racist about it at all, and I wouldn't have been in it if it were. But I think it was part of history, and I inherited it, and they did too. They've got another band now they call Hickory Wind, and they play rock music and dance music, and they the school teachers. The income is very welcome.
Okay, well, is there anything else you can think about the Art Center that you might want to put on tape here so we'll have it documented? Otherwise, we're going to move on to the last section.
I remember one. I used to drink a little liquor back in the days when I was over there, and one night I had a few drinks, and there was this elderly lady, and I proceeded to tell her how beautiful she was, and when I left, she asked, Bill said, "Who was that young man? She was one of the regulars over there. She was a patron of Bill's, but she was very impressed, and I thought she was beautiful. Actually, I don't think she was, but I wanted to leave her with a good feeling.
I would say that was a given. You really.
Then we all went swimming in Bill's pool that time. So.
Oh, is that the famous night that the next morning I found all the change in the bottom of the pool?
Probably so.
Yes, I remember lots of nights like that.
I never saw your father angry, but one time, and that was in Mexico, and he got mad at me I'd never seen Bill angry. He got mad at me. We went to this famous restaurant there called it's probably the most, it was down around Oaxaca, maybe, or Guadalajara, I don't know. I don't recall exactly where it was, but Espanianitas was the name of the restaurant. She and Bill got into an argument. He was in a real huff about that. And she was panic-stricken that she had made him so. I don't think she'd ever seen him angry. I don't know what they got into it about. We had the best time on that trip, though. We saw all the great art in Mexico. We saw the great revolutionaries like Diego Rivera. We went to Oaxaca. And I think you were there too. You were probably a teenager.
I was 18, but I remember, I was sick most of that.
Remember we'd let down the tailgate and have lunch on the tailgate?
Just anywhere. It was great. You wouldn't want to do that in Mexico now, I don't think.
I don't know. I thought it was a lot safer than it was in the United States. I haven't heard of it change, but then there may be. But I loved it. I love Mexico.
Well, let's move on to the last topic here, and that's to talk about Bill Hendricks and what you remember. And I would like to ask you, the first question is, how did you meet him? And we already discussed that a little bit, but you were in the...
I was at Cecil Collins's Arts. I met Bill Hendricks. He started visiting me in my home pretty soon after we met. He would come by here and eat lunch. I thought he was sort of a strange individual. He wasn't like anybody I had ever met. But he knew more about art and art culture than anybody. And he was a voracious reader. He read everything. And gosh, he had an awesome intelligence. So,
well, did you know about him before you met him, or how did you
I didn't know about him before I met him down there. I had never heard of him.
You just struck up a conversation? And
no, I went to that, said there he was, and he was the teacher.
Oh, he was the teacher?
Yeah, he was the art teacher down there.
Oh, I see. Oh, I don't know, I had this idea that he was in there by...
They started an art class upstairs over the art store. And Julia Nolan, I think, was the one that got me to started going there. But
so you went there for a class?
Bill said his mother was a concert pianist. Sometimes Bill would imagine things, but I think that was probably true. He never mentioned his father to me, so I didn't know much about him. He said his grandfather was in some kind of law enforcement in Arkansas or something to do with the law. There again, Bill wasn't above spinning a yarn if he didn't let a good story suffer for a few facts, you know.
That is true. Well, here, I have a real short timeline that I've kind of pieced together of from our newspaper articles, and it says here that he painted murals at the age of 13. Does you remember that?
I don't know about that. I knew that he had been in Atlanta, had been a teacher at the High Museum. I knew about that, but that was imparted to me after he came down here. I didn't know about it before. And I think he always had a connection with that school. In fact, the two judges that when I won the gold medal over at St. Simon's, the judge was from the High Museum. He was pretty well known in Atlanta before he ever came to the island. And I don't know when he and Mitty got together.
Did he ever talk about painting murals in New York or Cleveland?
No, I would know that he went to the Art Students League. That was the best art school in the country and at the time and still is. And Bill was a student. He went there and he had some great art teachers too. Some of them were nationally known people.
Well, then it says I worked as an art editor for a national publication. I don't know what that is.
I don't know about that.
Okay. In the Army, it says he did artwork for Special Services Branch. Did he ever talk about that?
We have talked very little about that, but I knew about it.
And it says he taught in Waycross, at Waycross Junior College. Did you know about that? Or?
Yep.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, here are your two war veterans. Did you ever talk about the war, or what did he do in the war? I knew what you did in the war.
You know, I don't recall that he knew that I was in the war. As far as just getting down and telling him about it, I don't recall that I ever did that. I knew he had been in service, but I didn't know what branch. It didn't seem like a matter of interest to us at that particular time. We just didn't get into that.
He told me he was in Signal Corps. So I just
That's a branch of the Army.
I know very little because, like you, I never really asked.
He never talk about that.
I was wondering if he ever described, Bill Hendricks, if he ever described his art or what he thought his art was about. Did he describe the kind of art he did? Or do you think he more...
I don't think he worried himself about that. He knew he was a good draftsman. Why he would throw a good picture down on the floor after he got through it, I don't know, but I have some of your father's paintings back there. I've got one, and he called the Three Graces that I'll show you later on. And I commissioned him to do that, and I paid him for it.
You are, I guess, would be more like a peer to...
I would say that.
I'd say
we considered ourselves after our time as sort of equals,
Well, how would you... why do you think that
he had more education, art education than I did? Most of my education came from him. It evolved to be.
Well, why do you think, and this is a question that I ask people and I get different answers, why do you think he didn't go on and develop his art and be a professional art, in his own right, instead of being a teacher all the time? Did he ever talk about that?
We didn't ever talk about it. It was just understood that he just painted and all. I don't think he was ever interested in making money or getting capitalized or anything like that. It was all bitty. I remember they said one time Bill was being audited by the IRS, and he just brought him a box full of receipts and handed them over. And I think they gave it up as a bad job, but that was how he handled business anyway.
Yeah, and that just is a real typical...
I think it's a good thing that Bill met Mitty. Because she looked after him just like he was a child. I think she was desperately in love with him too. She never did make any displays of affection, but you kind of sensed that. I mean, what was not to love?
You say he never told you about how he met her? I don't know.
No, I think she was from Atlanta. I think he had her when he finally first got here.
Well, he was married before, you know.
Yeah, I know that.
Did he ever talk about his first marriage?
No, he didn't.
Never did.
He wasn't.
He just really didn't talk about himself that much, I guess.
Not really. He'd tell you something if you asked him, but yeah. He wouldn't just run on and on about himself and his adventures and everything.
Well, how would you describe him as an artist? You're an artist. How would you describe him as an artist?
The finest draftsman that I ever knew. He could draw better than anybody I ever saw. With just a few lines, he could make you see it. And that's the way he taught, too. He didn't try to push you into something. He was how would it be if you did this and you do a couple of lines, all of a sudden you would see it. He let you develop yourself. He didn't try to make you over into another Bill Hendricks. He let you develop on your own.
Did you think that he had any kind of area that he was developing as far as art? Was he working on anything that he talked about?
I know he probably did more nude figures than anything else. I mean, he was very good. His nudes were great.
Well, why do you think he did so many? He did a lot of nudes and every imaginable.
Yeah, and sometimes they would, like sometimes a girl would get him to do a nude to give to her boyfriend or something like that. And, I mean, they were, maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Well,
but he would do one if somebody wanted one. I paid him for the ones that he did for me.
Well, is it considered in the art world, are those figure studies kind of difficult to do?
It's legitimate, and we don't think anything about the nudity of the thing. In fact, I think it's at the core of all art. You go back to Rembrandt. He did so many nudes, and most of them sort of obese and all. I mean, and also Peter Paul Rubens and those. So they did a lot of nudes and all. These guys, and I've got a set of books back there that your mother and father gave me, and 6 volumes of the drawings of Rembrandt alone, not paintings, drawings, and so it's at the core of all art.
Is it like more difficult to do than other types of art?
I don't think it has anything to do with difficulty. It's probably
it's just
your father was the easiest thing to do. I mean, he had such an extensive training in. The first one to ever use nude models in this country was an artist from the Philadelphia Museum of Art called Thomas Eakins. And up until that time, nobody had done any nudes in this country, but he became he was an artist that did the concert singer. Probably one of America's finest artists.
Do you remember him talking about when he was awarded the Carnegie Grant in 1950?
I knew about that, but I don't think we ever talked about it.
He was awarded a year to paint.
One thing he was not was a bragger. He didn't brag about himself.
That's why it's so hard.
If anything, he was too much the other way. Self.
It says that in the Brunswick News in 1963, they mentioned, an article mentioned he painted a series of murals for Fort Frederica. Of Fort Frederica.
I never did see those.
I have never seen those.
I don't know if they're in existence today.
I do not know. And Quayle Walker, who was the first president of the Glen Art Association, said they were on display at the Atlanta Art Institute. So you've never seen them, and I don't know anything about them. Do you think that Bill Hendricks did he have like a goal in his lifetime?
No.
No
He lived
goal.
for the moment.
He lived for the moment.
It seemed like he was always a happy guy. I mean, to me, I did not, like I said, I never saw him angry but one time, and he was good at anger that time. But most of the time, he was a pretty happy guy, always joking, and turning a phrase. And
Did he think that his family was like his most important or second to art? I know that's a loaded question.
He loved his family, and especially the little boy that died. I don't know. There wasn't much cooking that went on in that house, as I recall. I would come over there and cook for y'all, paella or stuff like that.
It was much appreciated.
It was kind of like y'all were camping out over there.
Well, my mother.
We'd always been out at the beach in the morning, so.
Yeah. But I remember taking long walks, coming in and taking long walks on the beach all the way to the King of Prince and back. That's a long walk from 14th Street. I do remember those walks. And do you have an explanation of why people would take classes for 30 years with Bill Hendricks? I mean, what could you possibly learn after 30 years?
Well, the truth about it, I was absolutely fascinated with the guy. That would explain my part of it, and I would assume that the others felt the same way about it. He had these devotees, these females that just hung on. Charlotte was one of them. Charlotte, Harold, she adored Bill.
And I asked him why they would continue to take classes for 30 years. They said, well, they continue
Well, they got to see
to
Bill
learn.
that way. They got to see him if they hadn't taken the class.
And they continue to
He
learn.
was that kind, he had that much personality.
And here's a quote from Susan Woodward in 1963. She said he was an exceptional teacher, teaches all art principles and techniques without forcing all the students to paint alike or imitate his own work. And you think that was
Yeah, I have
accurate?
developed that with you already. I told you that he didn't try to force you to be a little Bill Hendricks. He let you develop in your own way. He would encourage you if he saw that you were tending in a certain direction. He would encourage you to follow through with that. Like my genre painting, the local color. I was better at that than anybody around me. I haven't seen anybody that was doing it for that matter. I mean, I've seen a lot of people that were supposed to be doing it, but it didn't look like the real thing.
So he really, you give him a lot of credit then for helping you to develop that aspect, that part of your
Absolutely.
art.
But then, in later years, I did the military things and all. I've got some pictures over in the museum, Late Air Force Museum, and then I got into birds and nature things, and water birds and snowy egrets and that sort of thing. And I did a lot of that. And
Well, let's see. Here's a quote about his own art from him, from the newspaper. And he says that, he's talking about his philosophy of art. He says he believes that he should illustrate concepts rather than realities and paint in terms of interest. In modern art, the whole painting should be a gathering statement which comes to fulfillment. It must come to some sort of climax. Does that sound familiar?
Well, I missed a lot of that.
Well, it said he's saying here that he thinks that the painting or whatever you're doing should come to some kind of a climax. It should make a statement. He calls it a gathering statement.
Yeah, well, you know, the little eulogy I did about Bill, really a painting is what you have to say about life, your statement about life, your philosophy, and for that reason, I don't think one kind of art should be compared to another, and someone say this is better than that, this is a much better painting than that. That has no place in art. Art is a personal statement by the person that's doing it, and everybody's art is worthy of consideration. Obviously, it's a very bad art, but I never did make fun of it or anything like that. Because the people that were doing it were very sincere in their efforts.
Well, he goes on to say that he says most of my work, he's talking about his own work, has been experimental, and the results I have passed on to my students. So
I think he's thought of himself primarily as an art teacher. That was his, if you're asking me, did he have a goal? I think that teaching art was his greatest joy. I can't believe otherwise, but that's what I saw anyway. I don't think that he cared about being known as a well-known artist, a prominent artist, and anything. I think being an art teacher was his goal. He was a superb teacher.
Well, he
was always coming up with some kind of new exotic art that he would have his interest for a while, then he'd leave that and go on to something else.
Like cave art, I remember.
Yeah.
He studied that quite for a while, and that's the one thing that I remember that fascinated me, the cave art.
He didn't think being a lawyer was very important. He thought it was some kind of a joke. I didn't disabuse him of that.
Well,
in other words, he didn't take lawyers seriously, or doctors for that matter.
Well, didn't you find that he was always fascinated by what people did, though? He seemed to be.
Oh, yeah.
From the plumber to the whoever.
There was never anybody like him. I'll say that. He had a different. I guess that's why I was so fascinated with it. And it takes somebody to fascinate me.
Let's see. We've already covered most of this. I think we're getting to the end here. I wanted to ask you about when Matthew died. That was, his my brother and his son.
I know well. See, he was on the trip with us.
Yeah, and Matthew was 18 when he died, and I know that my father really took that hard.
He was kind of a tough little kid. Bill loved him, and I did too.
Well, did you
That was a
notice?
very sad time.
Did you notice any change in? Did you notice any change in
Yes, I
Bill
did.
after that?
Yes, Bill had some. He always had a little melancholy about that. He never got over it. And I don't mean that he went around brooding or anything like that, but he never got over that.
If you have any comment on this, it says Bill Hendricks has been defined as the father of arts in the Southeast. Would you think that's an overstatement?
I think that's too large an area. Certainly and over on the coast and all, but there were good artists in Savannah too, and I don't think he would be the father of art in the Southeast. I think that's too all-encompassing. I mean, it sounds all right.
Yeah, it does.
Well, he wouldn't tell you that he was the father. That would be the last thing that he would say.
Well, in the later years, did you see much of him, like in the last couple of years of his life? Did you keep in touch with him?
Not as much as I would have liked. When the art center closed down, that sort of closed off our relationship. There was no reason for me to go to Brunswick after that, or for him to come over here. We stayed in touch, but...
Well, I know that he considered you his closest friend. So I'm glad that you're able to give us some insight into him. I wanted to ask you, it's been 12 years now since he's passed away. How do you think he should be remembered? Do you have any comment on that? And do you still think about him?
He's a unique individual, beautifully educated, and a voracious reader, totally consumed by art and art teaching, nothing else. And let me tell you something. He was a pretty good singer, too. He used to sing as a super in the opera, and he had a beautiful baritone voice. But he was interested in the arts, and he didn't, well, like me being a lawyer, he didn't think there was a whole lot to being a lawyer. I mean, but I would say that he was totally consumed by art and art history, and he knew a lot about art history too. He knew who all the good painters were, and the schools of art. No, he was as checked out on that as I was. And he was always coming up with something new, sometimes surprising or so. There will never be another one like it, I can tell you that. He's unique. He was unique.
Well, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to show you some of my pictures.
Okay, we're going to do that. We're going to stop this part right now, and we're going to switch to the mobile unit. Go ahead and walk around, and you can point out some of your paintings. How about, did you want to do this one right here?
That is a painting that won second prize at the Sears Roebuck State Show, and was in a traveling exposition for a while. It's called Two Spanish Women. It's done in the style of Nicholas de Stael. Those heavy impasto areas. Actually, it portrays two Spanish women going toward a pueblo in the distance. That's the theme of the thing. I built the frame also, and it's always been one of my favorites. Bill liked that picture too. He thought I did a good job with that. This, as I told you, is my daughter Evelyn, who is also an artist, a very good one. It's done in the style of Velázquez with the lost profile. Let's come around here. This is a painting I did of a Spanish dancer. Actually, this girl that posed for this was done in class. And she had short legs, but I decided I needed some elongated underpinnings, so I lengthened her legs a good bit. I did the frame here too. This is a little crucifix in the middle, and I bought that in Florence. fella gave me the frame, and I didn't have a painting for it, so I did a painting for it, and that's my El Greco. That's done in the old Renaissance style with the green earth and white underpainting, and then the colors are glazed in with some impasto over all of it. I kind of like that painting. I did a store too. That was modeled after a door I saw Salvador Dali's on the Costa del Sol. I came home and made me one like it. This is a portrait of my wife at a much younger age. It's one of the 2 or 3 full. I've done 3 full-length portraits, so that's one of them. It's kind of, she likes it. This is my favorite painting. It was your dad's favorite painting. That's the one I said it was a pot boiler. He said, that's no pot boiler. And Charlotte and Glenda were with us when he said that. That's a Casey painting. I did put the colors in there, and then I covered it all with India ink, and then scrubbed the India ink off to get that dingy look. That's a street in Waycross. That's a pool room. That's a barber shop, and that's a junk joint. This fella's had a little too much to drink there. The beginning of a trust there. This is all of these. Some of those were put in with a palette knife, which you don't use very much with casein, but I did. This is Mrs. Avid. She was in Bill's class and my class. She wonderful little old lady. She was in her 80s when that was done, and she was still writing all the congressmen. She played the organ in her church. She was still very much involved with life. And I think that's one of my better portraits. All good portraits have some geometry in them, and that's something I learned early on. You got to have that to have a good portrait. Here's a fellow named Angus Strickland who used to be a great friend of mine. See, it's got the geometry in it too. Sometimes I notice a lot of some of the French artists there would not complete a hand, so they do. It makes a nice little drawing effect in it. And he was a sort of a Peckerwood patron of the arts, I'd say. He posed for the art class out here, and we had an art class out at Okefenokee Heritage Center. Okay, here's Charlotte. She was a much younger lady then, and she had a little friend she brought with her to pose, and that was done in watercolor with sable brush. And I'm gonna give it to her someday, if she'll have it. These are paintings I bought from other artists. Here's Mrs. Elliott again. Same lady. That's watercolor. You can see the brush marks. You see where it was trickling. The watercolor was trickling down. I did a lot of watercolors in an upright easel, which is hardly ever done, but I did some of them. Behind you is a Bill Hendricks that I commissioned. He called that the Three Graces. You got enough light in here?
Probably not, but it's, I'm seeing a blue light from from your microphone.
That's all.
That's okay. Is there another light in here?
No, but I can get a flashlight.
No, that's okay. It's okay.
Okay, come in here.
Come back and take some pictures of these. Okay.
This is now I did a lot of military paintings. This is a portrait of a picture of B-17s. Those were actual airplanes, and And I've done some of those, and it's a casein painting, tempera.
Is that the original?
The inter-aircraft or flak is done with charcoal, though. It looks just like what it really looked like. I can look at aerial paintings done by people who weren't there, and I can tell the difference.
Is that the original right there? Is
Yes.
that the original? Wow.
Yes, I was going to have some prints made to sell them at the reunion, but so far I haven't done that.
How about down here? Is that one of yours right
So
there?
those are my medals. There's some pictures. There's a portrait I did of my pilot and pen and ink. Chick. The guy from Chick's crew, you know. That's in the book, by the way.
And that's the original.
This is a pastel I did in class.
Let's see if I can get this.
I usually do a pastel in one sitting. I mean, I wouldn't. Bill was good with pastels too. This is one a painting that my daughter painted. So she's no slouch. She's an artist herself. That's her little girl. The rest of the pictures are pictures by other artists. Unless you want to go to my studio, there are a lot of dudes out there, you know.
Well, do you want to show anything out in your studio?
Yeah. Debbie, this is a Jacobean sideboard. Dates back to the Pilgrim Fathers. I made this store too.
You're amazing. Lead the way.
The fellow drinking there, that's my pet. This fellow was in my class over at St. Simon's. He was that's not my picture, but he was a heck of a good, he was almost an embarrassment to have him in the class.
And who was that? Is that, oh yeah, Joe Durrett.
Pull the door to the cat and get out of.
Oh, if you could. Okay, good now.
Watch your step. I told him whenever I built this studio, nobody is ever going to put anything in here now that doesn't belong to him. But I spoke to his son. That's the first oil painting I ever did.
And what age do you think you were when you did that?
Probably 12. That's one of my, that's a watercolor dude called, I call that Baroque dude. I won second prize in the Shrimp Boat Festival with that nude. Nudes don't usually win prizes, by the way.
Not in the Bible, though.
But that one did.
What else did you want to talk about?
Most of that was done in class. That was after they got a woman at the window. That backlighting is hard to do. But I was kind of proud of that one because I pulled it off pretty good, I thought. That's one of my watercolors right there. Gotta catch a fish. Watch your step. That'll be in my show when I have it in August. I'll send you an invitation.
Please do. This is watercolor.
That's me in the Confederate uniform down there. He looks a lot older than I do, but
is that you?
That's a charcoal. Okay, here's something I want to ask you. Do you know who this is? I can tell you he was head of the art. He was president of the art association, and he posed for us in class. I did that in one sitting, but I don't know his name. Charlotte would know.
Well, I will ask Charlotte. Looks familiar, but I don't recall.
He's a good-looking guy. I remember that. But watch your step. That's a pretty good look. Charcoal, I think. Did that in class. I had a class out here in the Oak Heritage Center. We used nude models, but they didn't know it.
Okay. That's a good trick there.
I mean that's kind of novel in Waycross, you know.
They didn't know it.
I think that's about it. Oh. I was trying to see if I had a picture of the rebel airs, but I don't think so. Watch your step.